Good morning, everybody. So today we need to start a lecture about the nerve muscle physiology. Actually, Dr. Ravi was supposed to take your lecture, but he got COVID infection, and that's why on his behalf I'm going to take his lecture. So today we are going to discuss something about the nerve physiology. So before discussing about the nerve physiology, a bit about the organization of your nervous system, how the nervous system is organized in your body. So, if you see your nervous system, the nervous system is broadly classified into two major categories. One is your central nervous system, and another is your peripheral nervous system. The part of the nervous system which is occupying your central axis of your body, that means your brain and the spinal cord. They are the portion of your nervous system which are occupying your central axis of your body. So though they are brain and spinal cord. Brain is located in your skull, and spinal cord is present in vertebral column. So they are constituting your central nervous system. So two major parts of the central nervous system is your brain and your spinal cord. Now, if you see the functioning of the spinal cord, so functioning of the spinal cord is that uh, spinal cord act as a pathway for transmission of the signal from the periphery to the brain, plus whatever the signal which is generated in your brain, they are being carried down to periphery uh, through the descending tracts which are present in spinal cord to the periphery. So you have in spinal cord, you have ascending fibers, you have descending fiber. Ascending fibers are carrying the sensory signals, and the descending pathways which are coming from your spinal cord, they are carrying this impulse which is generated in your brain to the periphery. Now, brain, if you see the functioning of the brain, that the functioning of the brain is that whatever the sensory impulse which goes to the brain through the sending tracts, these signals are being processed, and after processing of these signals, some planning and programming is done, and then whatever the impulse which is generated, they are being carried out through the descending tract in the spinal cord to the periphery. So all this processing of the sensory information, and in response to that, whatever the response which need to be initiated, they are being done by the brain. Now, in the peripheral nervous system, they basically transmit signals between CNS and the rest of the body. So, in the peripheral nervous system, they are the two major classes is that motor uh, mm, uh, neurons and your sensory neurons. So the sensory neurons, they are the carrying the signals from the periphery to the spinal cord and then to the brain. And whatever the signal which is generated in the brain, they are being carried through the motor neurons. So these sensory neuron and this motor neuron, they are going and coming out of the spinal cord. So in the spinal cord, when you will see the structure of the spinal cord, so you have dorsal horn and you have ventral horn. So whatever the sensory nerve fibers are there, they are entering the spinal cord through the dorsal horn of the spinal cord, and the motor nerves, they are coming out of your ventral horn. So dorsal horn of spinal cord is sensory, and the ventral horn of spinal cord is your motor. And this we call as Bell-Magendie law. As per the Bell-Magendie law, the dorsal horn of spinal cord receives the sensory nerve fibers, and the ventral horn of spinal cord, it is that this from this horn that motor nerve fibers are coming. Now, this motor nerve neurons, they could be of two class. One is the somatic nervous system, and another is the autonomic nervous system. As the name suggests, the somatic nervous system, they are basically they control the voluntary movements uh, which are being done because of your skeletal muscle contraction and relaxation. So all the contraction of your skeletal muscles, they are under the control of your somatic nervous system. And except your skeletal nervous system, all other systems, your smooth muscle, your cardiac muscle, your glands, they are being innervated through your autonomic nervous systems. And these autonomic nervous systems have two broad categories. One is your sympathetic nervous systems, and another is your parasympathetic nervous system. Uh, in very brief, sympathetic nervous systems is basically concerned for your fight and flight activities. So that means whenever you are in stress, the sympathetic nervous system is activated, and your parasympathetic system is are activated during the period of rest and during the period of relaxation. So when you're happy, you are relaxed. At that time, there is a parasympathetic predominance. And when there is a stress, there is anxiety, there is a condition of fight or flight. In that condition, your sympathetic nervous system is activated. So this was in a brief, very brief, that how the nervous system is organized in your body. Now, if you see the structural and functional unit of a nervous system, you will know that the structural and functional unit of nervous system is neuron. And it is said that about 100 billions of neurons are together, they are making your nervous system. And apart from neurons, if you see the other cells which are present, which are constituting your nervous system, you have glial cells. So glial cells are supporting cells. And the number of glial cells is more as compared to the number of neurons. It is said that it is 10 to 50 times more as compared to neuron. So we would be first discussing about the glial cells, and then different types of glial cells, and then we will discuss about neurons and the nerves, and then few properties about your nerves. Now, if you see the glial cells, the glia the word glia is derived from a Greek word which means glue. And previously, it was thought that these glial cells are just supporting the cells, so they act as the connective tissues in your central nervous system or in your nervous system. But now, with recent research and with recent advances, it has been found that these glial cells are not just providing structural support to your nervous system. Rather, they have a very important role in communication within the CNS along with neurons. So we will see what are the different roles of the different types of glial cell and what is their role in your nervous system. And one of the difference between neuron and glial cell is that you see neuron cells, once they get damaged, they can't they can't basically they can't show this cell division. The reason for that why the neurons can't divide is that they don't have centrioles, so the spindle formation is not there. So the process of mitosis and meiosis is not possible there. So neurons, one damage, they can't regenerate. Got it? So, but glial cells, this is a bit kind of you can say difference between glial and neurons. That glial cells can divide, and it is one of the reasons you see that if you see most of the brain tumors, they are not arising because of from your neurons. Rather, they are arising from your glial cells, because glial cells can multiply. So most of the malignancy in your brain is because of the glial cells. It's not because of neurons. So when you are born, you have a fixed number of neurons, and with as you age, the number of neurons keep on decreasing, because your body can't develop new neurons. Got it? Because they don't have the capacity of cell division, and that's one of the reason you see that as a fellow get old. So in they will have less of cognitive functions. Their intelligence level will decrease. Then the loss of memory is there, which we call that which we call as senile dementia. So it is why it is happening. It is happening just because the number of neurons with age keep on decreasing, and that's why your intelligence, your cognitions, or your motor skills or your memory will keep on decreasing, because with aging the number of neurons will keep on decreasing, and your body will not be able to generate a new neuron, because they don't have the capacity of cell division, as they don't have centrioles, which are very important for the formation of muscle spindles, which are required for mitosis and meiosis. That you may be knowing from your plus 2 knowledge. Now, if you see the types of glial cells, the glial cells are broadly classified in two major categories. One we call as microglia and another we call as microglia. And this classification is based on the size. And the microglia, here you have three types of microglia. They are astrocytes and Schwann cells and oligodendrocytes. Now, coming to, we will discuss a bit detail about all these cells. First, coming to microglia. Microglia are just scavenger cells, and they resemble a tissue macrophages. So you have just completed your blood, so you may be knowing the difference between blood monocyte and macrophages. So basically, all macrophages, whenever a monocyte is in the blood, we call them as monocyte. And when these monocytes come out of the blood circulation, and when they goes to the tissue, they are known as macrophages. And these macrophages are present throughout your body, and at different locations they are known as with different name. For example, if you see a macrophage which is present in your lung, we call them as pulmonary alveolar macrophages. Similarly, if these macrophages is present in your bone, we call them as osteoclast cells. Similarly, if this macrophages is present in your liver, we call them as Kupffer cells. Similarly, if this macrophages is present in your nervous system or your brain, we call them as microglia. So basically, they are a type of macrophages, and this microglia arise from the macrophages outside your nervous system. So it's not present, it's not developing in your nervous system. Rather, they're coming through the blood circulation. And when these monocytes come out of their circulation in the nervous tissue, they are known as microglia. And just like other macrophages, the role of microglia is same, that they remove the debris resulting from any kind of neuronal injuries or infection or disease. So they act as a scavenger cells. Now coming to the microglia, and the first microglia which we are going to discuss is your astrocytes. So this is one of the most, this is the most common glial cells which is present in your central nervous system. And this cell astrocytes, they look like a star. They are star shaped. And these astrocytes are of two types. One is your fibrous astrocytes, and another is known as protoplasmic astrocytes. So this fibrous astrocytes is present in your white matter of your brain. And protoplasmic astrocytes, they are present in your gray matter of your brain, and they have very granular type of cytoplasm. Got it? So you have two types, that is your fibrous and your protoplasmic astrocytes. Now, what are the importance of the astrocytes? One of the very important function of the astrocyte is to form blood-brain barrier. So what actually astrocytes do, that they have a projections. So they send their projection of processes to the blood capillaries, which is present in your brain. And these projections which are coming from the astrocytes, they induce tight junctions between the endothelium cells of the capillaries. And because of induction of these tight junctions between the endothelium cells of capillaries, the permeability of these capillaries decreases a lot. As a result, the exchange of material between your blood vessels and the surrounding neuronal tissues, that become very less. So they are in some way, it is a kind of protective mechanism so that your neuronal tissues don't get affected by changes which is happening in the blood. The changes could be of any type. It could be some changes in the electrolyte concentrations. It could be some drugs that can affect your neuronal tissues. But because of this blood-brain barrier, these compounds are not able to pass to the neuronal tissues, and your neuronal tissues are somewhat, uh, you can say, are protected, or they are not affected because of the changing concentrations which is happening in your blood. So one of the most important function of the astrocyte is that they form the blood-brain barrier, and it is somewhat uh, maintaining the internal environment of your neuronal tissues there in your brain. Second important function of the astrocytes, that they are the cells which are producing some neurotrophins. And these neurotrophins are very important with respect to growth and survival of the neuron. We will discuss a bit in detail about the neurotrophin later in the lectures. So this growth and survival of these neurons are somewhat facilitated by these neurotrophins, and these are neurotrophins are produced by your astrocytes. Third important functions is that these astrocytes they envelop the synapse. Synapse is what? It is a contact between one neuron to another neuron. So it is a connection. It's a junction between one neuron and another neuron. So these synapses are somewhat are enveloped by the processes of your astrocytes, and because of enveloping of astrocyte process over these synapses are somewhat isolated from other. So they help in preventing crosstalk between one synapse to another synapse. So this is another functions of the astrocytes. Fourth important function of astrocytes, they are very important with respect to maintenance of appropriate concentration of some ions and neurotransmitter in your brain. And how they do? They take up extra potassium glutamate and or GABA. So glutamate is a excitatory neurotransmitter, GABA is your inhibiting neurotransmitter, and because of this take-up of potassium glutamate and GABA by these astrocytes, the concentration of these neurotransmitter is somewhat maintained. Any excessive concentration or decrease in concentration of glutamate and GABA or potassium ion, they are going to affect the functioning or excitability of the neurons of your brain. Got it? So they are maintaining this concentration. Now coming to next is a type of microglia. They are oligodendrocytes and Schwann cell. So the functions of oligodendrocyte and Schwann cell is that both of them are important for formation of myelin sheet. So what myelin sheet are actually? The myelin sheets are basically a lipid protein complex which are formed over the axons of neurons. Got it? So they cover these myelin sheet. They cover the axons of your neuron. The functioning of the myelin sheet we will discuss later on. But at this very point, just remember that the myelin sheet formation over the neurons is because of oligodendrocyte and Schwann cell. The difference between these two cells is that the oligodendrocytes they form the myelin sheets over the axon of neurons of central nervous system. But Schwann cells, they are forming myelin sheet around the axon of neurons which are present in your peripheral nervous system. Got it? So this is one of the difference that oligodendrocytes are responsible for myelin sheet formation in central nervous system, and Schwann cells are responsible for the formation of myelin sheet in the peripheral nervous system. Another important difference is that between Schwann cell and oligodendrocytes, Schwann cells forms myelin sheets on a single neuron, and if you see that single neuron, they form the Schwann cells form the myelin sheet, just a portion of myelin sheet on a single neuron. But if you see the oligodendrocytes, these oligodendrocytes they emit multiple processes, and one oligodendrocytes can form myelin sheet over many of the neurons. So remember this difference that the Schwann cells form only a segment of myelin sheet on a single neuron, but oligodendrocytes can form myelin sheets on more than one neuron, depending upon what is the number of processes that oligodendrocyte is having. Now coming to the structural and functional unit of nervous system, and the structural and functional unit of nervous system is your neuron. About 100 billions of neurons is present in your nervous system, and these neurons are excitable cells. Many of the cells in your body are excitable cells. Your muscle, skeletal muscle is your excitable cell. Your smooth muscle, your cardiac muscle, some cells of your glands, they all are excitable cells. So what do you mean by excitable cells? The excitable cells means that whenever a stimulus is given to these cells, they will respond to that. And the response is what? The response is your electrical, that they will develop some potential. Okay. Depending upon the strength of the stimuli, they have developed different type of potential that we will see later on. But what I want to say is that any tissue, when subjected to any stimulus, if they are producing change in the membrane potentials, so they are excitable. Stimulus could be anything. It could be some mechanical stimulus. For example, it could be touch, it could be pressure, it could be some vibration, or it could be electrical stimulus, or it could be some chemical stimulus. Some chemical substance is put, for example, neurotransmitter is a chemical substance. है. So stimulus could be anything, but response is one thing, that is your electrical response, that is genesis of some potential. Either it could be graded potential or could be action potential. What actually graded and action potential are, we will discuss when we will discuss about the property of the neurons. Now, if you see the structure of the neurons, some broader portion or the portion the structure of the neuron are that the first is your nerve cell body or soma. Second is your dendrites, which is coming from your soma or cell body. Then a long elongated projection which comes out of your soma is your axon. And then these axons terminally the branches, they divide into many branches, and each of the branches they end at synaptic knob and terminal button. So here in this diagram you can see the structure of neuron. This is cell body, soma, and from soma you can see some projections are coming, which we call as dendrites. Then one elongated projection which is coming from your soma is your axon, and this axon is divided into lot of multiple branches, and these branches end terminally at synaptic buttons. And these synaptic button can make synaptic contact with either another neuron, or it can make contact with any muscle. It could be skeletal muscle, it could be smooth muscle, it could be cardiac muscle, or they can make kind of contact with any glandular cells, and they can stimulate that. So this is a rough structure of neuron. Now coming to the nerve cell body or soma, the nerve cell body could be of different shapes depending upon different location. They could be star shaped, they could be circular, they could be pyramidal shaped, they could be fusiform shape. So depending at different location of your brain, they are of different shape. So they are having different shape at cerebral cortex, they are having different shape at cerebellum, they could have different shapes in hippocampus areas of the brain. So that is different thing. And the nerve cell bodies are what the function that, of course, they are the metabolic centers of the neurons. By metabolic center means that if you see the constituent of a nerve cell body, so it is just same as compared to any other cell, meaning that they are having the same constituent. For example, a cell, a typical eukaryotic cell, they're having a membrane, and then you have a nucleus, then you have a mitochondria, then you are having Golgi apparatus, endoplasmic reticulum, ribosomes. So just like any other cell, whatever the constituent they are having, all that constituent is present. And since the nucleus is present in the soma or the nerve cell body, so they are responsible for formation of all the protein or neurotransmitters. So that's why we call them as the metabolic center. And the principal constituent, as I told you before, it's same as the general cells. In diagram you can see here, this is a soma, nucleus is there, and then you have ribosome, Golgi apparatus, microtubules, endoplasmic reticulums, all the constituents which any eukaryotic cells is having, they are having, except one thing, that they don't have centrioles, and that's the reason they can't divide. Now, apart from all these general constituents, one another specific constituent is another specific constituent is present in the nerve cell body or soma, that we call as Nissil granule. What that is present in your neuron. So these Nissil granules are, they are basically membrane bound cavities, these membrane bound cavities are surrounded by nucleoproteins. Nucleoprotein, what they are? They are RNA plus proteins. So they are the present over the in the cytoplasm of the nerve cell bodies, and these the Nissil granule, they stain blue with a dye which we call them as methylene blue. So in this diagram, you can see this is a typical structure of a nerve cell body which has been stained with methylene blue. So all these bluish color you can see, they are what? They are Nissil granules. And the importance of the nasal granules that they are very important, really important with respect to formation of neurotransmitter. For example, acetylcholine. If a neuron is secreting acetylcholine, that the formation of this neurotransmitter for the formation nasal granules are very important. Got it? And the amount of nasal granule which a neuron will have depend upon what is the status of this neuron. Status means, I mean that if there is any kind of injury to the neuron, or whenever there is a fatigue, or whenever there is a poisoning, then what happens? These nasal granule disintegrate, and the number of this nasal granule decreases. So whenever there is a degeneration in the neuron, this nasal granule will also degenerate, and that we call this we call as chromatolysis. So the disintegration of nasal granule into fine dust because of degeneration of the neuron is known as chromatolysis. Okay, and whenever the regeneration of the neuron is happening, then this nasal granule reappear again. Got it? So depending upon what is the condition of neuron is, that neuron will be having this amount of nasal granules. So if it's healthy, the amount of nasal granule will be more. If there's any problem with the neurons, the number of nasal granules will somewhat decrease because of chromatolysis. Now, next portion is your dendrites. Dendrites, as I told you before, they are the extensions which are coming from the soma or the nerve cell bodies. And these dendrites, these somas, these dendrites, the main function is that they basically increase the surface area of the neurons. Got it? These dendrites are basically the receptive zones. So whenever another neuron is coming, whenever the axons or the synaptic terminal of one neuron comes and they make a synaptic contact with the dendrites of the another neuron. So the signals are transmitted from the synaptic terminal of one neuron to the dendrites of the soma of another neuron. You got it? And from there, the signal is transmitted from one neuron to another neuron. So basically, if you see the functioning of the dendrites, they act as the receptive areas from where the signals enter the nerve cell bodies, and then it is transmitted through axon to another neurons. Got it? Axon, they are single elongated protoplasmic extensions from the nerve cell bodies. They are the axons. And unlike dendrites, they carry the impulses away from the nerve cell body. Dendrites are carrying the impulses, or they are carrying the electrical impulses, nerve impulses towards the nerve cell body. Here they are carrying impulses away from the nerve cell bodies toward the synaptic terminal. And the thickened portion of the nerve cell body from where the axons are arising, that portion is known as axon hillock. And the initial segment of the axon, which is not myelinated, we call them as initial segment. Got it? So the first portion of axon, which is coming out of the nerve cell bodies, we call that portion as initial segment. The importance of the initial segment is that when we will discuss that how action potential develops. So you will find that this is the location where the action potential first develops, and then this action potential is carried through the axon to the end of the axon, which we call them as synaptic terminal. Now the cytoplasm which is present in the axon, we call them as exoplasm, and the membrane which is covering the surface area of axon, we call them as axolemma. So here in this diagram, you can see a typical structure of a neuron again. This is the soma I told you before, and these projections which are coming, which we call as receptive area, are dendrites. And this thickened portion of the nerve cell body from where the axon arises, we call them as axon hillock. And the first portion of the axon, which is non-myelinated, we call them as initial segment from where most of the action potential are arising. And then this is an axon, and it is myelinated. You can see, different segments of myelin sheets are there, and then it's divided into multiple branches. And now coming to the last portion of axon, that is your synaptic nerve. Now at the end, this axon will divide into multiple branches, and each of these branches will end at synaptic nerve, and as synaptic nerve. Now these synaptic knobs, what they are having vesicles, and these vesicles are having different types of neurotransmitter. So depending on what type of neuron it is, they're having different types of neurotransmitter. And these synaptic knobs make contact with other cells. Other cell could be anything. It could be a neuron, it could be a muscle, as I told you before, or it could be a any glandular cells. So this is the way how a signal is generated, is transmitted to another cell. You see that any impulse which is generated in the neuron, they are being carried through the axon, through the nerve terminal, synaptic knob, and when they make synaptic contact with another, then there, through the release of neurotransmitter, this impulse is transmitted from that one neuron to another cell. Now coming to exoplasmic flow. Now we know that neuron is a secretory cell. Why we call them secretory cells? Because we have seen that at the synaptic knob of the neuron, you have vesicles, and these vesicles are having neurotransmitter which are released whenever a neuron is excited. Now the problem with neuron is that though it is a secretory cells, but the one of the problem is that the place of formation of the neurotransmitter and the place of release of the neurotransmitter is bit different. Most of the protein synthesis or which is required for the formation of the neurotransmitter, that is happening at the level of soma or nerve cell body. Just wait. Hello. So most of the protein synthesis is happening at the level of soma because they are having nucleus. But you will see that the release of this neurotransmitter is happening at the level of synaptic knob. That means that this material, just wait a minute, call is coming. Sorry, there was a call, some important call was there. So what I was telling you that if you see the neurons are secretory cells, but problem is that the material the which is needed to be secreted at synaptic terminal is a neurotransmitter. But these neurotransmitters are synthesized in one area and released from other area. That means this area need to be transported from the location of synthesis to the location of release, and this is happening because of exoplasmic flow. So it's a flow of exoplasm in the axon. So this flow of exoplasm could be of two types. One is your orthograde exoplasmic flow or orthograde transport, or other we call them as retrograde. So as the name suggests, orthograde transport, that means at the normal direction this flow is happening, and the normal direction is that from your cell body to the nerve terminal, to the axon terminal or synaptic knob. So this flow of axon from your nerve cell bodies to the axon terminal, we call them as orthograde transport. And this exoplasmic flow occur along the microtubules with two molecular motors, that is your dynein and kinesin. So these molecular motors are carrying the protein which is required for the synthesis of the neurotransmitter. And this orthograde transport, they have two components. One is your fast axonal component, transport component. Another is your slow axonal transport component. Now, this fast axonal transport, both of them differ with respect to at what speed they are transporting the material. So fast axonal transport, they occur at the speed of 400 millimeter per day, and slow axonal transport, the speed of that is your 0.5 to 10 millimeter per day. Got it? Another you can see in this diagram, okay, this is a soma and this is your synaptic terminal. So here the protein which is required for the formation of the neurotransmitter is synthesized, and then through the exoplasmic flow, through the orthograde transport, it is being carried along the microtubule with the help of molecular motor units to the synaptic terminals. Got it? Now, another type of exoplasmic flow is your retrograde transport. Retrograde transport means that is happening in opposite to the normal. So here the flow of exoplasm is from axon terminal to the cell body. And just like orthograde transport, they also occur along the microtubule, and the speed is 200 millimeter per day. So it has been seen that various viruses or the nerve growth factor which is present in the periphery, they bind with the receptors which is present at the axon terminal at the synaptic knob, and then these material get internalized, and through the exoplasmic flow they go to the soma or the nerve cell bodies. Got it? So this is the happen because of retrograde transport. Along with that, whenever a synaptic knob is releasing a neurotransmitter from their vesicles, some of the vesicles are recaptured again, and they are being processed again for the release of new neurotransmitters. So these vesicles which have discharged their neurotransmitter, they are again get internalized, and through exoplasmic flow they are again transported to the soma, where the synthesis of these neurotransmitter is happening, and they get filled, and then they come back again at the synaptic knob. So retrograde transport is also important with respect to your orthograde transport. Now coming to the classification of the neuron. So till now we have discussed about a bit about the structural aspect of your nervous system, then about the structural and functional unit of nervous system, that is your neuron, and then we have discussed about the glial cell. Now coming to the classification of the neuron, neurons could be classified by different ways, and one of the ways is that on the we can say on the structural basis, the neuron could be classified on the basis of polarity. Polarity means that what are the projections which is coming from the soma or cell body. So one type of neuron could be unipolar, the type of the neuron in which you have only one protoplasmic extension. So that is functioning both as a dendrite, both as a function can have an axon. So that is having, this neuron is having only one single protoplasmic extension of process, and they are generally found in lower animals, in invertebrates. Pseudo unipolar is that you can see here in the, this is a unipolar, this is soma and only one protoplasmic extension. Pseudo unipolar is that it look like a bipolar. Why bipolar? Here a axon is there, and this axon is split into two branches. So it would look like that this neuron is having two projections, but actually they're having a single axon which is splitting into two branches. So that we call as pseudo unipolar, and it is very important cell that you will see in your spinal cord, in the dorsal root of a spinal cord. So you will have this cell, dorsal root, in the dorsal root ganglia. So you are having this pseudo unipolar cell. So here a neuron is there, it has an axon, and this axon divided into two branches, and one branches is going toward the periphery, and one branches goes to the dorsal hall of the spinal cord. Got it? So this is your pseudo unipolar. Bipolar, as the name suggests, okay, they have one axon and one dendrite at opposite end, and this bipolar neurons is found in the retina of your eye. So it has two protoplasmic projection, one axon, one dendrite. Next is your multipolar. So here you have many dendrites along with axon. So most of the neuron in your body are multipolar. So you see your cells which is present in your spinal cord, hippocampus, or cerebral tract, or cerebellum, or cerebral cortex. So most of that is you can have multipolar because they have lot of dendrites, protoplasmic extensions are there. Now another basis of classification could be with respect to functions, what functions they do. So one is your afferent neuron or sensory neuron, another is your efferent neuron or motor neuron. So afferent or sensory neuron, as the name suggests, these neurons carry these sensory impulses from receptors to central nervous system. So whenever these are, we call them as afferent neuron, and those neurons which are carrying the impulses from your central nervous system to the periphery, we call them as afferent neuron, or we call them as an efferent neuron or motor neuron. And this efferent neuron, again, we told you it could be of somatic or autonomic. Somatic efferent neurons, they are basically stimulated skeletal muscle, and autonomic means that they, apart from skeletal muscle, all other structures are innervated by these autonomic. Interneuron category is also there, and interneuron is, as the name is suggesting, it is connecting afferent and efferent neuron. So here in this diagram, you can see that afferent neuron, which is a sensory neuron, it is entering the spinal cord through the dorsal root of a spinal cord, and then it is making a synaptic contact with a interneuron, and this interneuron is making a contact with a efferent neuron, which is a motor neuron, and this motor neuron comes out of the spinal cord to the ventral root of the spinal cord. Got it? So this is the interneuron between afferent and efferent neuron. Now, second, another basis of classification could be, just wait for a minute. So another basis of classification could be on the basis of myelination. As I told you before, that myelins are lipid protein complexes, just like cell membranes, which are deposited, which are present over the axons of the neurons. So if a neuron, if the axon of a neuron is having the myelin sheet, we call it as a myelinated neuron, and if that myelin sheet is absent, we call them as a unmyelinated. So this myelinated nerve, a sheet of myelin is wrapped around the axon, and I told you before it's a lipid protein complex. And we know that in central nervous system, this myelin is formed by a microglia cell, which we call as oligodendrocytes. And in peripheral nervous system, this myelin sheet is formed by Schwann cells. So, and in non-myelinated nerve or unmyelinated nerve, they don't have a myelin sheet. And here, what we are happening, they are being surrounded by the Schwann cells. Schwann cells are present there, but they are not forming the myelin sheet. So they are just surrounding the axon. So here, these type of neuron or nerve, we call them as non-myelinated. Now, coming to the process of myelination, like how this myelin sheet is formed. Now, if you see the process of myelination, this myelin sheet formation starts before we take birth. It starts in the womb of mother, the intrauterine life. And this process of myelination is not complete at the time of birth. And it takes about 1 year after birth to get completed. So if you see the process of myelination, it begins before the birth and it continues even after the birth. So during the second trimester of pregnancy, this myelin sheet formation is started. And if we talk about peripheral nervous system, we know that this myelin sheet is formed by the Schwann cells. So here what happened is the Schwann cells wraps its membrane around. First, what happens is Schwann cells membrane, they elongate. You can see a neuron is there, and this large thing you can see, this is a Schwann cells membrane. So what happened is first the Schwann cells membrane get elongated and they envelop the axon. And then what happened is this Schwann cell membrane, they wrap the membrane, they wrap the axon again and again, and they form multi-layer membrane of Schwann cells. They cover the axon. So and this membrane of the Schwann cells, they are what? They are lipid protein complex, and this we call as myelin sheet. So the myelin sheet is formed by the Schwann cells. First, the membrane of the Schwann cell get elongated. They surround the axon, and this membrane of the Schwann cell, they start wrapping the axon over and again, about 100 times or more than 100 times. And this multiple layer of membrane of Schwann cells, we call them as myelin sheet. And the membrane of the myelin sheet, they are made up of lipid protein complex. Got it? And then once the multi-layer of membrane of the Schwann cell have been wrapped over the axon, their membrane get compacted, and that myelin is then compacted through a protein which we call as protein 0. So what happened actually, the membrane uh, of the Schwann cell, they're having this protein which we call them as protein 0, and this protein 0 lock with protein 0 of opposing membrane, and because of this locking of protein 0 of one membrane with the protein 0 of another membrane which is opposing each other, so there is a compaction, so they get compacted. And why protein 0 is important? Because it has been seen that there are some congenital diseases in which there is a mutation of this protein 0, and because of mutation in the gene which is coding this protein, these individuals are having demyelinating diseases. Got it? Now the importance of myelin sheath is that now if you see the myelin sheath of our peripheral nervous system, you will see that this myelin sheath is not continuous, and you will see that there are periodic constrictions are present. That means suppose 1 millimeter of myelin sheet is there, then there is a gap of 1 micrometer, and then another myelin sheet. Then again, after completing 1 to 2 millimeter distance with myelin sheet, again there is the area where you don't have myelin sheet. There is a constriction, and then you have another area of myelin sheet. So you see that it's not a continuous, rather there is a constriction of 1 micrometer after every 1 millimeter distance, and this constriction we call them as nodes of Ranvier. Now one segment of myelin sheath between two nodes of Ranvier are formed by one Schwann cell, and then another segment of myelin sheath between two nodes of Ranvier, they are formed by another type of myelin sheath, another Schwann cells. So remember that the whole myelin sheath of an axon, they are not formed by a single Schwann cells. Rather, multiple Schwann cells are forming myelin sheath there. So one Schwann cell is forming only a segment of myelin sheath over the axon. Got it? And if you see the property of myelin sheath, these myelin sheath are having very high insulating properties. And because of this insulating properties, the crosstalk between one neuron to another neuron is not happening because nerve impulse is not able to pass. Another thing is that because of this high insulating properties, they prevent the leakage of potassium ions. Got it? And because of this leakage of potassium ion, uh, uh, they are somewhat preventing the membrane to go in the state of hyperpolarization. Plus, whatever the depolarization is happening, they are not happening in those areas which are having myelin sheath. They are happening at the areas which are non-myelinated. That means nodes of Ranvier. So whenever an action potential is developing in a neuron, they don't need to depolarize the whole membrane. They just need to depolarize only the segment of nodes of Ranvier, and action potential, they jump from one nodes of Ranvier to another nodes of Ranvier. And this is known as saltatory conduction. And because of this jumping of action potential from one nodes of Ranvier to another nodes of Ranvier, the speed of this the speed of conduction is become very high. So here you can see axon. You see one myelin sheath, then another myelin sheath, and in between them you have nodes of Ranvier. So when an action potential is developing, it is jumping from one nodes of Ranvier to another nodes of Ranvier because of this myelin sheath. Because this myelin sheath has very high insulating properties, and because of that, there's no exchange of membrane, which there's no exchange of ions. So here the depolarization is happening at the level of nodes of Ranvier. We will discuss in detail. It's a bit confusing. It may appear a bit confusing to you at this time, but when we'll discuss the properties, we will I will better try to make you understand. Now, one of the applied aspects, we were discussing a lot of physiology. Let's discuss something about the applied aspects of all these things. Okay. And one applied aspect is that we will discuss about disease which we call them as multiple sclerosis. And this multiple sclerosis is the type of demyelinating disease, and it's a type of autoimmune disease. So you may be knowing that autoimmune disease from your knowledge of your blood portion, that here the antibodies or your white blood cells, they are not able to distinguish between self and non-self antigens. Self antigen means those antigen which is present in your body, and non-self antigen means which is coming from the outside. So when this distinction between self and non-self is not there, what the antibodies and the white blood cell will start doing? They will start damaging your own structure of your body. So this is happening in multiple sclerosis. Some antibodies and some white blood cells are developed against the myelin sheath of your body. Got it? So this happens in multiple sclerosis, and it is if you see the predominance or prevalence of this disease, it is more common in female as compared to male. And the cause of multiple sclerosis, one very common cause, it could be because of some genetic mutation. And because of this genetic mutation, the distinction between self and non-self is abolished, and your body start developing antibodies or white blood cells which start attacking the myelin sheath of your own nervous system. Or it could be because of some previous viral infections. It has been seen that previous infection with Epstein-Barr virus, measles, herpes, chickenpox, influenza, they can cause multiple sclerosis later in life. So because of that, uh, your body start making some antibodies. Basically, when you get infected, your body start making antibodies against these viral infections. And some of these antibodies, apart from attacking virus, they can start attacking your myelin sheath also. So two important causes: genetic or because of environmental factor. And environmental factor, more important is that because of previous viral exposure, because of Epstein-Barr virus, measles, herpes, chickenpox. Now what will happen? Now these antibodies and white blood cells, they will damage the myelin sheath, and they will lead to demyelination. And because of this demyelination, what will happen? The insulating properties of myelin sheath will be lost. And what will happen then? Your potassium, which is present in large amount inside this cell, they will, through the potassium leaky channel, they will efflux, they will come out. And whenever the positively charged ion come out, what will happen to the membrane potential inside? The membrane potential will become more negative. Normally, we know that your cell is a polarized. Polarized means that there is a differential distribution of ions inside and outside the neurons. So we know that the inside of the neuron is negatively charged as compared to outside in resting state. And if you see the distribution of ion, we know that the sodium ion is more on the outside of the cell, and potassium ion is more inside the cell. Now, when the cell start losing a positively charged ion from the inside, so the potential inside the cell will become more negative, and that we call as hyperpolarization. And when the cells get hyperpolarized, that means they become less excitable. More the negative potential inside the cell, the lesser is the cell is excitable. So a cell will get hyperpolarized, and because of this hyperpolarization, they will not able to conduct the impulses. And when this nerve is not able to conduct the impulses, these impulses will not go to the effector organ. And the effector organ is what? The muscles, which they are innervating. So when the impulses are not going to the muscles, the muscle will also not contract. So there will be relaxation of the muscle side. They will not contract. As a result, there will be weakness in the muscle. So here there's a demyelination of myelin sheath. Because of this demyelination, there's loss of positively charged potassium ion. Because of that, the nerve gets hyperpolarized, and because of that, the nerve is not able to conduct the nerve impulse to the muscle. And when the nerve impulse, the amount of nerve impulse going to the muscle decreases, there will be no excitation of the muscle. As a result, there will be weakness of the muscle. So if you see the symptoms of this multiple sclerosis, there is a muscle weakness, the muscle get easily fatigued, there is a diminished coordination. Whenever you are making any movement, you have, suppose you are walking, you want to walk. So muscle of your gluteus, muscle of your thighs, muscle of your legs, they all need to coordinate. But since because of multiple sclerosis, the muscles are not contracting, this coordination is impaired. So you are not able to make any purposeful activity. Your speech is slurred because the movement of the tongue, mouth, that is not coordinated. There is a blurred or hazy visions because the extraocular muscles of your eye, which is doing the eye movement, they are not contracting properly. They are not coordinating. Apart from that, there will be sensory disturbance because nerve is getting hyperpolarized, they're not carrying the impulses to the brain. Got it? And it has been seen that symptoms become more severe whenever there's an increase in temperature. With increase in temperature, the formation of these antibodies become more, and then they start damaging more of the tissue. The symptoms will become more severe. Now, how to diagnose multiple sclerosis? One method there is some physiological tests, some neurological tests, could be, and some radiological tests can be done. Nerve conduction test. Nerve conduction test basically detect what is the conduction velocity of the nerve. Conduction velocity means that at what speed the action potential is running in your nerve. If this action potential, the speed of this nerve conduction decreases, that means there is some kind of demyelination. Then CSF. CSF analysis. CSF means cerebrospinal fluid. So cerebrospinal fluid is present in your brain and your spinal cord. So if they have the antibodies against this myelin sheath, then of course the diagnosis of multiple sclerosis is made. Then MRI, that is your magnetic resonance imaging. So you can do the imaging studies of your brain and your spinal cord, and there you can see the demyelinated patches. And the presence of these demyelinated patches will of course point towards some demyelinating illness. See, till now we were discussing about the neurons. There is a difference between neuron and nerve. Nerve is a collection of neurons. Many neurons, they come together, they form a nerve. Okay. So what we have discussed? We have discussed about the structure of the neurons. We have discussed about the classification of the neuron. Now we will discuss about the structure of nerve. So collection of neuron is your nerve. So if you see a neuron, a single neuron, so that single neuron is surrounded by connective tissue, a very thin connective tissue, which we call them as endoneurium. And then many axons or many neurons, they come together and they form bundle, or we call them as fascicles. So these fascicles or these bundles are surrounded by another connective tissue, which we call them as perineurium. Now, when many bundles come together, they are again surrounded by connective tissue sheets, which we call them as epineurium. Okay, and that is forming a nerve. So first a neuron with its connective tissue, which we call them as endoneurium. Then many neurons come together and they're all surrounded by connective tissue, which we call them perineurium. Then many bundles, they come together, and these all bundles are surrounded by connective tissue, which we call them as epineurium. Okay. So here you can see in diagram, this is a neuron is there, and this neuron is surrounded by connective tissue, which we call them as the endoneurium. And then many neurons, they come together, they form a bundle, and this bundle is surrounded by this green, you see the connective tissue, which we call them as perineurium. And then many bundles, they come together, and these bundles are again surrounded by connective tissue, which we call them as epineurium. So all together they're forming a nerve. Now coming to the properties of the nerve, we will discuss. So first property of the nerve is excitability. So from at the very beginning of the lecture, we have said, I have said that it's an excitable tissue. Okay. So excitability means that whenever a stimulus is given, they will respond to that stimulus. And in nerve, that response is generation of membrane potential. Okay. So whenever a stimulus is given, there is some disturbance in the ionic equilibrium across the membrane of neuron. And because of the disturbance of the ionic equilibrium across the membrane of the neuron, there is generation of some membrane potential, and that is the response. And the stimulus could be anything, as I told you before. It could be electrical, it could be chemical, it could be physical. Now, before discussing about the excitability, a few terms I need to, I think I should discuss with you. First thing is your resting state. Resting state is also known as polarized state. So normally, if you see a cell or a neuron, so you will see that there's a differential distribution of ion across the cell membrane of the neuron. By differential distribution, I mean that some concentration of some ion is more on the outside and concentration of some ion is more on the inside. If you see the inside of the cell, Then inside of this cell is having large number of negatively charged protein, negatively charged phosphate ion, and negatively charged sulfate ion. And these all are impermeable. They don't come out. They don't permeate come out of the cell. So because of all these negatively charged ion, proteins, and phosphate and sulfate, if you see there's a there's a predominance of negative charge inside the cell of a neuron, and on the outside there is the positivity. So resting state, the inside of the neuron is negative and outside of the cell is positive. Now, if you see the cation distributions, so you will see that the sodium ion is present in large amount in the outside of neuron, and inside of the neuron you have large amount of potassium ion. Okay, so and because of this differential distribution of the ion, you see that the inside is cell is negative and outside is positive, and that's why we say a cell is polarized, because there is also one pole positive, one pole is negative. So this is polarized. So that is the resting state. Depolarization means that when this resting state changes, that means inside of the cell become positive. Previously it was negative and now it become positive because of movement of large amount of sodium ion from outside to inside. If this happens, we call them a state of depolarization. Hyperpolarization means that the normal state we know that a neuron is negatively neuron inside of the neuron is negative. That means the potential is minus 70 millivolts. Now, if that negativity become more than the resting state, so we call that the state of hyperpolarization. Suppose the membrane potential of neuron is minus 70. Now, from minus 70 it become minus 100, so it become more negative. So if that happens, we call the state of hyperpolarization. Repolarization means that once suppose a cell has depolarized, that means inside has become positive, and then it again comes to the resting state. So when the cell moves from the state of depolarization to the resting membrane potential to the resting state, so with that we call them as process of repolarization. So you should know what is the resting state or polarized state, what you mean by depolarization, what you mean by hyperpolarization, and what you mean by repolarization. Now, now when a stimulus is given to a neuron, now depending upon the strength of the stimulus, neuron can develop two type of response. One response could be that they can generate a local non-propagated potential. Another, and this local non-propagated potential is known as synaptic potential, generated potential, or graded potential, or electrotonic potential. Different names there are. And another response could be that they can produce a propagated potential. Propagated potential means action potential. Propagated potential means that at one place of depolarization is produced, and this depolarization flow throughout the membrane of the neuron. So that means the propagated potential. And local non-propagated potential means that a small area of depolarization is produced and that remain localized. It is not depolarizing the neighboring membrane. But in a propagated potential, there a local depolarization, state of depolarization is produced, and this state of depolarization will subsequently depolarize the neighboring membrane, and then the whole membrane will get depolarized. So two type of response could be there. One could be a graded potential, and another could be an action potential, which is a propagated potential. Now, what type of response would be generated, that will be depend upon the strength of stimulus. If the strength of stimulus is more than the threshold of neuron, then there is a action potential, and the strength of stimulus is less than the threshold level. Threshold level is that level at which there is the generation of action potential, and if the strength of stimulus is less than that threshold, then they will produce a local graded potential or synaptic potential or generative potential. Got it? So that will depend upon the strength of stimulus. Now, we will discuss about the genesis of action potential, how an action potential is. So the requirement for the action potential is that a stimulus with a strength of a threshold level must be given. And if you are giving a stimulus of that threshold level, then action potential can be produced. I tell you example that, see, resting membrane potential is suppose minus 70 millivolt. And if it is said that if this resting membrane potential reaches to suppose 50 to 70 minus 50 to 60 millivolt, that means a depolarization of over 10 to 20 millivolt, then an action potential could be produced. So this minus 50 or minus 60 millivolt, we call them as threshold. You have to move the resting membrane potential to this potential, to minus. Suppose resting is minus 70 and suppose threshold is your minus 50. That means you have to give a stimulus which carries this resting membrane potential to minus 50. That means the stimulus strength should be of at least 20 millivolt. If you are giving a stimulus of that strength, then action potential will be generated. Okay. So first, see what are the steps how this action potential will come. First, I suppose a stimulus is given at threshold level. Then this potential, this stimulus will cause a local disturbance in the ionic distribution across the membrane. And because of this local disturbance in the ionic equilibrium across the membrane, some of the sodium ion will open, channels will open. And since the concentration of sodium ion on the outside of the cell is more, so the sodium ion will move inside of the cell. As the sodium ion will move inside the cell, what will happen to the membrane potential? This membrane potential will become a bit will move towards the positive side. That means it will move from minus 70 to 0 side. So suppose this goes from minus 70, this membrane become more potential, it will go to minus 70, then minus 60, then minus 55, and then it will go to suppose minus 55. Suppose minus 50 millivolt. And this is suppose this is the threshold level. So first is that you give a stimulus, and because of this stimulus there is a local disturbance, and because of this local disturbance the resting membrane potential will decrease and it will move towards the positive side or towards the zero. Then when it reaches the threshold level, then at that time what happens? Suddenly large number of sodium ion will open, and because of opening of this large number of sodium ion, large amount of positively charged sodium ion will move from outside to the inside, and this we call as a stage of rapid depolarization. So this is we call as stage of rapid depolarization, and it is an example of positive feedback mechanism. We will see. So the stage of rapid depolarization is because of sudden opening of sudden influx of sodium ion inside the cell, and because of that the membrane potential become positive. Now if you see the ionic basis of depolarization, so depolarization is happening because of opening of sodium ion channel, and these sodium ion channels are what they are? Voltage gated ion channel. So if you see a sodium ion channel, they are having two type of gate. One we call them as activation gate, and another we call them as an inactivation gate. Activation gate is present on the outside and the inactivation gate is present in the inside of this ion channel. Now if you see in the resting state, when the resting membrane potential is minus suppose 70 or 90 millivolt, at this stage what is happening? Actually the activation gate is closed and inactivation gate is open. Now when you give a membrane potential, when you give a stimulus, and because of that stimulus it is reaching to a threshold level of suppose minus 50 millivolt. So then at that time what happens is this is a voltage gated ion channel. So the change in configuration of this ion channel will happen because of change in the membrane potential. So when the membrane potential become more positive as compared to the resting membrane potential, And then what will happen? There is a sudden opening of the activation gate. Now, inactivation gate was open before, and now the activation gate also get open. So this ion channel get open, and because of this opening of the activation gate, what happened? There is a large inflow of sodium ion, and because of this large inflow of the sodium ion, then the positivity inside the membrane will increase. As a result, the inside of the membrane will get positively charged, and that we call as depolarization. So remember this, this is happening because of voltage gated sodium channel. This voltage gated sodium channel open and closes with response to change in voltage. Normal state, it has two gates, activation gate on the outside of this channel and inactivation gate on the inside of this channel. Whenever the membrane potential comes to the threshold level, the activation gates open. As a result, large amount of ion channel large amount of ions, sodium, positive sodium ion will enter, and that will cause depolarization. I told you that before. This rapid depolarization is because of positive feedback mechanism. In positive feedback mechanism, we have seen that one change is happening, and this change is further favoring that change to happen. That is a positive feedback mechanism. So here you see that if there is a depolarizing stimulus is there, and because of this depolarizing stimulus, some opening of the voltage gated sodium channel happens. And because of this opening, there is an increase in the permeability. And because of this increase in permeability of the membrane to the sodium, there is an increased inflow of the sodium inside. And because of this inflow of the sodium, there is a depolarization. Now, this depolarization will cause further opening of the sodium ion channel, because sodium ion channel is a voltage gated channel. So this depolarization will further open the sodium ion channel. So again, more sodium ion will open, and this again when the more sodium ion will open, more sodium ion will flow inside. This will cause more depolarization. More depolarization will cause more opening of the sodium ion channels, and because of this cascading effects, yeah. Because of this cascading effect, what is happening? This inflow of the sodium ion inside the cells keep on happening, and because of that, there is a rapid depolarization. There is a rapid change in the membrane potential toward the positive side. So here you can see the membrane potential rises above the zero up to plus 30 level. So previously the resting membrane potential was minus 90. It reaches the threshold level of 50, and then there is a rapid stage of depolarization, and then the membrane potential shoots towards the positive sides, and at the end of the depolarization, it is something like plus 30 or 35. Now, once the depolarization has happened, there is a closure of sodium channels. Got it? And the membrane potential, they come back towards the resting state. So this movement from the state of depolarization to the resting state, we call them as a process of repolarization. So the process of repolarization is happening because of two reasons. One is that there is a closure of sodium ion channel. Because of that, no more positively charged sodium ion will enter into the cell. Second, there is the opening of potassium channels, and because of this opening of the potassium ion channel, there is the efflux. Efflux means from inside to outside. There is a efflux or loss of positively charged sodium ion, and because of this loss, the membrane potential again regain its negative potentials, and it comes back towards the resting state. Now, how this process is happening? First, we will discuss about the closure of sodium ion, how the closure is happening. See, the depolarization causes the opening of sodium ion channel. Remember that the depolarization which was causing the opening of the sodium ion channel is also causing the closure of the sodium ion channel. So the depolarization not only opens sodium ion channel, but it also closes the sodium ion channel. The difference is that the opening of the sodium ion channel is very rapid process. Because of the change in membrane potential, there is change in configuration of the sodium ion channel, and because of that opens. Now when the membrane potential become positive, so that same depolarization will cause closure. But the closure of the sodium ion channel is the configuration changes which causes the closure of the sodium ion channel is bit slower as compared to the opening of sodium ion channel. It is bit delayed. Got it? So first thing is that because of the depolarization, there is a closure of sodium ion channel. Opening of sodium ion channel is a rapid process, and closure is a delay, a bit slow delay, a slow process. And because of this difference, there is a large amount of sodium ion will first enter into the cell and it will cause depolarization. And then there is a closure. So first is that deep closure has happened because of depolarization. Second is that the depolarization which was causing the opening of sodium ion channel is also causing the opening of potassium ion channel. But the difference of opening of sodium and potassium, because both the ion channels are voltage gated, they will open and close with they will open because of change in the membrane potential. So what happened with the depolarization which was causing opening of sodium now open the potassium. But difference is that the opening of potassium ion channel is a slow process. The configurational changes which open the potassium ion channel is slow, and that's why first there is the opening of sodium ion channel, because of which large amount of sodium ion will move inside the cell, which will cause the closure, which will cause the depolarization. And then after some time there is the opening of potassium ion channel, and because of opening of the potassium ion channel there is a large efflux of potassium outside this cell, with the loss of potassium from the outside of the cell, from the inside of the cell. As a result, what will happen? The membrane potential will start coming towards the resting state, which is a negative potential. So remember this opening of potassium ion channel happen generally at the same time when there is a closure of sodium ion channel. So the repolarization is happening because of closure of sodium ion channels and because of opening of potassium ion channels. There is a loss of positive charge from the cell, and the cell again try to regain its negative potential. So you will see the membrane potential will move from positive towards the resting state, and it will towards its negative state. Got it? So to remember the point which need to be remembered, we remember that the depolarization is causing opening of sodium ion channel. Depolarization is causing the closure of sodium ion channels. Depolarization is causing opening of potassium ion channels. But remember, the depolarization doesn't causes the closure of sodium ion channel. The closure of sodium ion channel will happen only when the membrane will again become negative. Got it? When the membrane potential again become negative, then only there is a closure. So here you can see in the resting state of potassium ion channel, uh, this potassium ion channel is voltage gated, and the resting state, the gate that means at the membrane potential of -90, the gate of potassium ion channel is closed. But once the depolarization has happened and the membrane potential has become positive, so at that time there is a change in configuration, and because of this change in configuration, there is an opening of potassium and ion channel, and because of that there is loss of potassium from this cell. So there is a loss of positive charge. So what happens? The membrane will become towards negative, and this is what will cause repolarization. Similarly, if you see the sodium ion channel at when the membrane potential become positive, this change in voltage, this depolarization will causes the closure, and there is a decrease. There is a then because of that sodium no more inflow inside the cell, so there is no depolarization is taking place. Now we have first we have said seen so we have seen three stages of action potential. One stage is that when the membrane potential move toward the threshold. Second stage is that the stage of depolarization, then stage of repolarization. Then next fourth stage is your after depolarization. After depolarization is that if you see the large state of repolarization, the last stage of depolation become very slow. Okay, that means depolarization become very slow, and this slow repolarization we call them as after depolarization. And the ionic basis, the reason for that is there is a slow potassium efflux, because as you move from towards the positive, as you move towards the negative membrane potential, as the membrane is getting repolarized, some potassium ion get closed, है ना? So because of the closure of some potassium ion channel, the efflux of the potassium decreases, and because of that, the process of repolarization become very slow, and that this slow repolarization we call them as after depolarization. And then the last stage we call them as after hyperpolarization. Then the after hyperpolarization is that the process of repolarization keeps on happening, and sometimes uh, they continue even after regaining the negative membrane potential. Suppose the membrane potential is minus negative, and the membrane is repolarizing. So this process of repolarization keeps on happening even after attaining minus 90 millivolt. It can go down up to minus 100 millivolt, because potassium ion is open. So what is happening? Potassium is losing, and slowly cell become more negative as compared to resting membrane potential. So that we call as hyperpolarization. So that's why we call them as after hyperpolarization. So here the membrane potential become more negative than resting membrane potential, but then it gradually return back towards the resting membrane level, and at this stage, the neuron try to regain its original ionic composition. By meaning, by when I said that original ionic composition, I want to mean that you see what has happened during the depolarization. Large amount of sodium has entered inside the cell, and during the repolarization, large amount of potassium has moved out of the cell. Now, neuron has repolarized; it has came to its resting state. But even after attaining the resting state, the ionic composition is somewhat changed from the previous resting state. And what was this change? Change is that the inside of the cell is having sodium more, and outside this neuron has lost the potassium. Originally, they should be having more potassium inside, and this sodium, whatever has entered inside the cell, they must go to the outside. And this is being done by what? By a pump, active pump, which we call them a sodium potassium ATPase pump. The detail about sodium potassium ATPase pump, it has alpha and beta subunits we have discussed before. So, but functionally we know that the sodium potassium ATPase pump, what they do, they pump 3 sodium outside the cell and 2 potassium inside the cell. So whatever the sodium which has entered the neuron to depolarization will be pumped out, and whatever the potassium which have been lost from the inside of the cell to the process of repolarization will come back again inside the cell. That is the your after hyperpolarization. And that is this way the cell regain its original ionic composition. So that is your after hyperpolarization. So remember, when a stimulus is given of threshold level, first the membrane potential will move to threshold level. At the level of threshold, the large opening of sodium ion channel because of the depolarization, and there is a stage of depolarization. Then there is a closure of sodium ion, and there is opening of potassium ion. Then the membrane potential will come back towards its resting state, and that we call as repolarization. The last state of repolarization is bit slow, and that part portion we call them as after depolarization. And sometimes when the membrane potential become more negative, we call them as after hyperpolarization. But gradually they gradually return to a resting state after hyperpolarization, and doing this portion of action potential the neurons regain its original ionic composition through the functioning of sodium potassium ATPase. Okay, so you see that the for excitability is an active process because you need sodium potassium ATPase. So whenever your neurons get excited, it is using ATP. So this is the process of an active process. Now this diagram I have shown you that how the conductance of sodium and potassium is happening during action potential. So this the red line you see, this is an action potential. Got it? So during this stage, during the phase of depolarization, the sodium conductance is more. Okay, because at that time the potassium opening is bit slower process. So this when the sodium conductance decreases, at that time the configurational changes of potassium ion will allow the potassium ion to open, and then the conduction of potassium will increase, and you will see that potassium conductance increases during the phase of repolarization. So when there is a depolarization, the sodium conductance is more, and when there is a repolarization, at that time the potassium conductance is more. The effect of depolarization, I told you before, if you see the effect of depolarization on voltage gated sodium channel, remember both activation and inactivation is because of depolarization. And if you see the effect of depolarization on potassium channel, then you will see that the activation of a potassium channel is because of this depolarization. But inactivation is not dependent upon this depolarization. Inactivation will happen only when the membrane potential will reach its resting membrane potential, and that resting membrane potential is your negative potentials. Remember this. Now, this diagram, I would have better explained this diagram if we would be having class in lecture theatre by drawing it on your blackboard, because that will give you a better picture. But I will try to do this thing on your online class. You know, see, uh, you see in this in this graph, you have this upper diagram something, and you have some in the lower diagram. In the upper diagram, it is showing your membrane potentials. Okay, how the membrane potential is changing when an action potential is generated. Okay, and corresponding to this, it is showing the excitability. So when this membrane potential has happened, then what is the excitability? Whether the excitability has increased or decreased. When I say excitability is increased, I mean that they can be stimulated with a stimulus of very weak strength. And when I say that excitability is decreased, that means you need a stimulus of higher strength to stimulate that. Right? So in this graph, you see that in the upper figure is changing, showing your what membrane potential, how the membrane potential is changing when an action potential is generated, and lower corresponding diagram is showing doing this showing the excitability of membrane in different phases of action potential. So you see here, this is a dotted line is showing you the resting membrane potential. Now at this time you have given a stimulus, and this stimulus is carrying the membrane potential towards the threshold level. Okay. So at this corresponding to this increase in the membrane potential, if you see, the excitability is increasing because it is moving towards the positive direction. As your membrane potential moves toward the positive direction, the excitability is somewhat increasing. Now what happened? When it has reached the threshold level, the excitability is maximum. Now at this threshold level, a large amount of sodium ion open, and there is a rapid depolarization. So you can see here the membrane potential is rising. But here you see, as the process of depolarization is going on, the corresponding excitability is somewhat decreasing. Membrane potential is moving towards the positive direction, but excitability is decreasing. How to explain? Explanation is very simple. I told you before. The depolarization which was causing the opening of sodium ion channel is also causing closure of sodium ion channels. And when the sodium ion channel will get closed, then what will happen? Then no more depolarization will happen. Because for depolarization, you need positive charge ions. So what is happening? As you move up in the depolarization, the excitability will decrease, because as the depolarization is moving up, more and more sodium ion is closing down. Then during the process of repolarization, the membrane potential become more negative. So during this phase, we know that sodium channels get closed. So what will happen? Corresponding to this state of action potential, you will see that the excitability is somewhat decreasing. So you see, as the membrane potential is moving toward the threshold level, the excitability is increasing. During the state of depolarization, as you move up during the state of depolarization, this excitability is decreasing. The state of repolarization, as it is moving down, the excitability increases up to till they reaches the resting membrane potential. And during the phase of after hyperpolarization of action potential, the excitability is further decreased, because membrane potential has become more negative. And when it become more negative, we need a stimulus of higher strength to excite. Now a bit about the difference between graded potential and action potential. In the beginning, we have discussed that when you are giving a stimulus less than the threshold level, so they will produce local depolarization, which will not be able to propagate. And if you are giving a stimulus of threshold level, they will produce a potential over the membrane, which can propagate throughout the membrane, and that we call as action potential. So few differences that you should be knowing. One is that this graded potential is graded and action potential is non-graded. Very similar. Graded is graded. Remember, graded means that the amplitude of the depolarization will depend upon the strength of the stimulus. If you are giving a stimulus of weaker strength, then amplitude of depolarization will be less. And if you're giving a stimulus of higher strength, then the amplitude of depolarization will be more. Action potential is non-graded, meaning that the amplitude of action potential will not depend upon the stimulus strength. If the it depends just on whether the stimulus is threshold or less than threshold. So if you're giving less than threshold, no action potential will be generated, and if you're giving stimulus of threshold, then action potential will be generated of fixed amplitude. And suppose you are giving supra threshold level, matlab more than the threshold level, even then the amplitude of action potential will remain same. For example, if the amplitude of action potential is plus 30 millivolt, you have given a strength of a stimulus and it has created an action potential and it has gone till plus 30 millivolt. So that plus 30 is the fixed amplitude. Even if you give a stimulus more than this threshold level, suppose आपने 20 मिलीवोल्ट का दिया आपने स्ट्रेंथ स्टिमुलस और आपको एक्शन पोटेंशियल मिला प्लस 30 मिलीवोल्ट का, अगले बार आपने 40 मिलीवोल्ट का स्टिमुलस स्ट्रेंथ दिया, इसका ये मतलब नहीं कि एक्शन पोटेंशियल जनरेट होगा वो उसका एम्पलीट्यूड 60 मिलीवोल्ट का होगा, नेक्स्ट टाइम भी एक्शन पोटेंशियल जो जनरेट होगा वो प्लस 30 का ही मिलीवोल्ट का होगा। डिपेंड ये करता है कि स्टिमुलस का स्ट्रेंथ थ्रेशोल्ड है कि थ्रेशोल्ड से ज्यादा है कि नहीं, and that is the basis of all analog law. If you are giving a stimulus, depending upon the stimulus strength, either an action potential will be generated or it will not be generated. In between कुछ नहीं होता, ठीक है? No, graded potential could be depolarizing or it could be hyperpolarizing. Action potential is always depolarizing. It will move the resting membrane potential toward the positive side. I told you before, the graded potential cannot be conducted. Action potential can be conducted. In action potential, when a depolarization is produced, this depolarization will depolarize the neighboring membrane, and this neighboring membrane will depolarize further neighboring membrane, and this way this action potential will travel throughout the membrane. This graded potential has no threshold level. We know action potential has threshold level. Refractive period, it has no refractive period, it has refractive period. About refractive period we will discuss later. Refractive period, just at this level try to understand that if you are giving two successive stimuli back to back, so there is a period during which if the second stimulus is given, then there will be no response. So this period is known as refractive period. So if two stimulus is given back to back, then the duration during which if the second stimulus is given, there's no response is generated. So this means refractive. The nerve has become refractive. If you're giving second stimulus during that time, there will be no response. So in a graded potential, there is no refractive period. In action potential, there is a refractive period. That means if you give a stimulus during that portion of action potential, which is refractive, then there will be no generation of second action potentials. Okay, and example of graded potential could be motor end plates. Motor end plates we will discuss when we'll discuss about neuromuscular junctions. The receptor potentials when we will discuss about the receptors. So the example of graded potentials. Okay. Now strength duration curve. We will discuss a bit about strength duration curve. See, when a stimulus is given and then in response to that stimulus, a response is generated in the form of change in electrical potential. That electrical potential could be graded potential or it could be action potential. Now, whether the response that will be generated will depend upon two things. One thing is that what is the strength of the stimulus? I know. And second thing is what is the time duration for which that stimulus is given. If you are using a stimulus of higher strength, then to stimulate a tissue, you need to give it for small duration. But if you are giving a stimulus of weaker strength, then to stimulate that tissue, you need to give that stimulus for longer duration. So if you see, if you draw a curve between the strength of the stimulus and the duration, so you will see that the strength of the stimulus and the duration of the stimulus is somewhat inversely proportional. So higher stimulus of higher strength need to be given for small time duration, and stimulus of weaker strength need to be given for longer duration. So that is the thing of strength duration curve. So if you draw a curve between your on the x-axis you have time, on y-axis you have current, then you will see that a curve type of thing is formed, which is showing a inverse relationship between this. Now, few terms are important here. One is your U base, second is your utilization time, third is your chronometry. U base is the minimum intensity of stimulus which must be given to generate a response. Suppose a tissue is there, and to stimulate that tissue, you have given a stimulus of 1 millivolt, no response. Then you have increased the stimulus strength to 2 millivolt, no response. Then you have given a stimulus of 3 millivolt, and at that 3 millivolt, there was small flickering you have seen in that tissue. So this is the minimum intensity that need to be given to generate a response. So that minimum intensity of stimulus strength that need to be given, that is known as Rho base. Just like you all have given your entrance examination, and for entrance examination there's a cutoff value. Suppose 500 marks was there in your medical entrance, and then for selection, suppose there was a cutoff of 400 marks. So any student with at least you should have 400 marks, then you are eligible for counseling. You come for the counseling. Some student may have more than 400, it's okay, but less than 400 are not allowed in counseling. The same is with there is a Rho base. This is the minimum intensity of the stimulus that need to be given to stimulate, to generate a response for that tissue. So that minimum stimulus strength, we call them as Rho base. And the time duration for which you need to give this stimulus is known as utilization time. Okay? The time duration for which the stimulus of Rho base intensity is given to generate a response is known as utilization time. Now, second, we call them as chronometry. So chronometry, what it is, this is your minimum duration for which a stimulus of double the strength of Rho base must be given to generate a response. So chronometry is the time. What it? So Rho base is the stimulus strength and chronometry is time. So if you give a stimulus twice the strength of Rho base, then for how much duration? For minimum duration for which this stimulus must be given to generate a response. So that is your chronometry. And lesser the time duration, more excitable the tissue is. So the duration of chronometry is used to find the excitability of tissue. Different tissues have different chronometry value, and the tissue with a less chronometry value, we say that this is more excitable. You are giving a stimulus double the strength of Rho base. If one tissue get excited in 1 second, it is, and one tissue get excited in 5 seconds. So who is more excitable? The tissue will get excited, which needs this stimulus strength for less duration, and that is your first tissue that is requiring just 1 second to get stimulated. So that is your chronometry, and it is used as an index of excitability of tissue. So if you are having 3 tissue and their chronometry value are given, then the tissue which is having the least value will be most excitable, and the tissue which is having higher value, highest value, will be least excitable. Got it? So this is your extent duration curve. Now, a bit about the factor which affect the excitability of this membrane. Actually, I don't know whether your ST membrane potential have been taught to you or not, because that is important to understand this. But I will tell you some factors which affect the excitability. First is excitability depend upon a lot upon how the ions distributions are there. So we know that sodium ion concentration is more outside the cell, and potassium ion concentration is more inside the cell, and resting membrane potential is minus millivolt. Now, what is the effect of hyponatremia? Hyponatremia is that whenever there is a decrease in concentration of sodium ion. Okay. So if the concentration of sodium ion is decreased or increased, it is not going to affect the excitability, because we know that at resting membrane potential, the most of the sodium ion channels are closed. So whether it's increased or decreased, it is not going or coming in. But the amplitude of action potential is decreased if the concentration of sodium ion in the extracellular fluid is decreased, if there is a hyponatremia, because amplitude will depend upon what is the amount of depolarization. An amount of depolarization will depend upon what is the amount of sodium which is coming from outside to inside, and that will of course depend upon what is the concentration of sodium in the outside. So excitability is not affected by change in sodium ion, because in normal resting state sodium ion channels are closed. So any change in the concentration of sodium in the extracellular fluid is not going to affect the resting membrane potential, but amplitude of the action potential is affected. It can decrease because when depolarization is there, the sodium is coming from outside to the inside of the cell. If the amount of sodium on the outside is less, of course, the amplitude of the action potential will be less. Coming to hyperkalemia, concentration of potassium ion. Two conditions: hyperkalemia, hypokalemia. Hypokalemia means the concentration of potassium on the outside is less, and outside I mean extracellular fluid, which is bathing the neurons. And hyperkalemia means that concentration of potassium ion on the extracellular fluid is more. See what will happen when the concentration of potassium ion is increased on the outside. See, if there is a neuron and the concentration of potassium ion on the outside become more. See, on the in resting state, potassium, there are some leaky channels which is present, and it is said that in resting state potassium ion channel is more permeable as compared to sodium. In resting state, sodium ion channels are not permeable, but in resting state, it is said that there are many potassium leaky channels which are permeable. And it is said that permeability of potassium ion is about 500 times more as compared to sodium ion channels in normal resting state. Now what happens is potassium ion concentration is more inside the neuron, and potassium ion concentration is less in the outside of the neuron. So the gradient is from inside to outside. Potassium will move from inside of the neuron to the outside. Now if the concentration of potassium is more on the outside, then this gradient become less. That means the less of potassium will move from inside to outside. That means more of potassium will remain inside the neuron. That means more of positive charge ion will remain inside the neuron. That means the membrane potential will move toward the positive side. That means the membrane will move towards the depolarization. That means the membrane will become more excitable. So whenever there is a hyperkalemia, potassium is not moving from inside to outside, because the potassium will get accumulated. It will lead to increase in positive charge, that will increase the membrane potential towards the positive side, and that means there is an increase in excitability. Now whenever there is a decrease, there is hypokalemia in extracellular fluid, that means more and more potassium will be lost, because gradient is in that favor. So more potassium will move from inside to outside with loss of positively charged potassium ion. That means there is increase in negativity. That means there is a hyperpolarization. And whenever there is hyperpolarization, the excitability decreases. So whenever there is a hyperkalemia, the excitability of neuron increases. And whenever there is a hypokalemia, the excitability decreases. Now effect, this is very important with respect to excitability of neurons. Effect of calcium ion concentration. and exclusively hypocalcemia. See what happened if you see the normal voltage gated sodium ion channel. So over the top of the sodium voltage gated channel, there are calcium ions are attached, and because of this attachment of calcium ion channel over the top of sodium ion channel, there is some change in the configuration, and because of this change in the configuration, what happens? The stimulus of higher strength is required, and that means depolarization of larger strength is required to open the sodium ion channel. Now, what happened actually when there is a hypocalcemia and there is a decrease in concentration of calcium ion, then what happened with this inhibitory effect of calcium, which they were having over the sodium ion channels, is being removed. And now even a weaker stimuli can cause opening of sodium ion channel, and that will lead to depolarization. That means that it will be lead to excitation of the neurons. So whenever it is said that whenever the concentration of the calcium decreases to the 50% of its normal value, then what happens? Even a minor stimuli can cause contraction of muscle, and that contraction of muscle we call them as tetany. Even a touch sensation can cause spasm, and that spasm is because your nerves have become very excitable, and a minor touch is going to excite that nerve, and when that nerve is excited, it is going to stimulate the muscle, and that muscle is going to contract, and that goes in spasm. That we known as tetany. Got it? So this is the effect of hypocalcemia. The role of calcium we should be knowing. The calcium binds over the top of sodium ion channels, and because of this binding, there is change in configuration, and because of that, there is stimulus of higher strength is required to open. But whenever the concentration is decreased, stimulus of weaker strength can also cause opening of sodium ion channels. That means your nerve will get excited more easily, and that means if nerves are getting excited, then there will be easy excitability of muscle also, and there could be a spasm or sustained contraction, which we call them as tetany. And tetany happens only when the calcium level decreases to less than 50% of your normal value. So maintaining the electrolyte balance in the patients is very important. Any change in the concentration of potassium or calcium can be very devastating in the patients. And this was about this, and then a few factor which decreases the excitability of the membrane. One is that hypercalcemia. More is the concentration of calcium, more stable the membrane. More stable means they will become less excitable. Second is your local anesthetic agents. You have seen that your local anesthetic agents that you see that if you get a minor cut, then doctor will give you stitch. So before giving the stitch, first they will try to give some local anesthetic so that that area become numb. So generally lidocaine and procaines are the local anesthetics which the anesthesia which they are given. So what these local anesthetics do? They basically are having membrane stabilizing effect. They closes the sodium ion channels. Okay, and because of this closure, the nerve is not able to conduct the impulse, and when the nerve is not going to conduct the impulse, you are not able to perceive any sensation. So whenever you stitches are given, you are not able to feel the pain, because this local anesthetics have closed the sodium ion channels, which is responsible for causing depolarization and generation of action potential, which is conducted along there. So these are the two important membrane stabilizing factor. One is which will decrease the excitability of neuron. One is increase in concentration of calcium ions, and second is your local anesthetic agents. So I think it's time now, and we are going to end this lecture. On Tuesday we'll meet again and discuss the rest topics of neurons. Okay. Have your lunch.